Welcome to the UK Reparations Conference 2024, from Acknowledgement to Action. We are really pleased to gather the UK Reparations movement for our second annual conference, and I am very proud to be the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Afrikan Reparations in the UK's Parliament. We are a cross-party caucus of members of Parliament calling for policy on reparations in this, our country, which was commonly known as the Mother of Empire. I want to start by paying tribute to all of those, all of our elders and activists who have been fighting for reparations for a long time. We do have to acknowledge them. Because despite what you may have heard in the news, the fight for reparatory justice began long before any of us were born. And I know that in Parliament it began with the late, great Bernie Grant, who was the first person to stand up and ask for an apology for enslavement and colonialism. Now, when this struggle started many years ago, when it became heard a bit more in this country, people would tell those it was a very fringe thing, that sometimes even tell them that they were crazy. But we have seen over the past week that apparently it's quite topical. Because of what we've heard coming out of the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit. And I'm very proud that those nations refused to be silenced and refused to be dictated to as to what would be on their agenda. Because the struggles of today, no matter what people may say of them, are a measure of progress for tomorrow. We need to understand that it is very insulting when people tell peoples of African descent to forget and move forward. Because there are so many other instances in our society that we are asked to remember. In fact, we're coming upon one of them in the next couple of weeks, where we are asked to remember that young people are taught in history and told that they must remember so that they do not repeat it again. But when it comes to things that have happened to peoples of African descent, we are told to forget and move forward. But the reason why this can't be done is because they used to actually say that the sun never set on the British Empire. And that's why there is a huge number of countries in the Commonwealth family of nations. And our group in Parliament exists because our country has a moral and legal duty to make amends for the trafficking, enslavement, colonisation and continued exploitation and degradation of peoples of African descent at home and abroad. If Parliament abolish the slave trade, which they speak so proudly about, then we understand that there will be legislation needed to make reparative justice a reality. Now, we've heard so much about money, in particular, over the past few days, and we need to understand that that whilst we could never fully recompense for the harm that has been done during enslavement and colonisation, it's important to understand that if we continue to refuse to do anything, it's simply a continuation of the crimes that we have committed, and that we have a duty to do all we can. And the idea that, it's got nothing to do with our present is absolutely false, again, because of that continued exploitation and degradation, but also because many of you in this room, as many of you are definitely over a certain age, we all know that we never finished paying the UK off the UK's largest loan, which they took out to pay off those who were the slavers and not the enslaved. We never finished paying that off until 2015. That means I paid towards it, you paid towards it, and people right across the country. So the idea that this isn't in our present, where it was very much in our present in terms of what we paid, is false. And the expressions that we've heard, the other thing is extremely insulting, the expressions that we've heard that deep sorrows or regrets are, fitting for one of the greatest crimes in human history. I mean, when I think about things that I deeply regret, I think about the fact that I know some of you may, because I saw some of you turn up early, that I did not look at my phone, and I instead looked at my clock and woke up a whole hour earlier. That is something that you deeply regret. You do not deeply regret, you cannot deeply regret what was the sheer horrors of enslavement and colonialism, trafficking, torture, exploitation of millions and millions of people. It's disrespectful because you understand when our country and other countries refuse to continue to apologise, it's because they do not see us and people that look like us as their equals. And people of African descent, no matter where they are in the world, are being looked down on when we do not offer that kind of apology. Now, it's very, very important to remember that resources continue to be plundered and things continue to be extracted from countries. But as I said, it's an understanding that when people are calling for reparations, it goes beyond finances. We are talking about environmental reparations, health reparations, educational reparations. There are so many different things that we need to do to repair the imbalance that was created by enslavement and colonialism. And, you know, one thing that I've been saying a lot this week is that an apology is free. And even with that, we are still not being granted it. And things that have been stolen, they're going to have a whole session today on restitution and culture. Things that have been stolen, let's be quite clear, theft is theft. And when you know that there are, you know, the loot of empire exists in the British Museum and others across the country, you understand, again, the sheer disrespect when people who have it well documented that these things were stolen from the arks from them back and are told that finders keepers is essentially our rule of law. And to add to that, we have some of the human remains of some of our ancestors, some of our freedom fighters kept in these places that are still not being returned. And that is even in contravention of our law. And when we're asked, we're told that our countries have been given so much in aid, but you know, we understand that international development has become an industry, and all industries require supply and demand. So we're going to be addressing all of those issues today. We are going to be addressing the fact that we should not be grateful that the UK ended the slave trade. The idea that we should be grateful and not challenge anything else is completely wrong. I don't see any situation or in which you praise the arsonist for putting out the fire. And lest we forget that even though the slave trade was ended, the whips and metal and shackle and brutalization was replaced with other constraints, other international constraints which make it difficult for certain countries to move forward. So the idea of moving forward without having changed these international structures, with people being crippled by debt, their resources again continually being extracted, makes absolutely no sense. And people need to stop telling us that we are looking for a payday, because that's not what we are looking for. We're looking for respect and equality. So, as we move forward today, I want to explain to you how this conference came about and why we are here, because as international conversations are being had, it's clear that some of the activists are left out of the discussion, and we did not want that. Whenever policies are made without consulting and engaging with the grassroots, they do not end up benefiting them, and they set themselves up to fail. So it's very important that we are here. Again, there are people who are specialists in many different areas. There are members of parliament you are going to be addressed by, but most importantly, there is the community. And we want to hear from you as we move forward. Now, we're going to hear firstly from many of the people that have been able to make this possible. There are some organisations for which we have to be extremely grateful. And I'm going to start with one of them initially. And thank you to those of you that have been very, very patient online. Oh, before I go to that, I do have to go to my Vice Chair, Clive Lewis MP. He's the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Afrikan Reparations, and he has been working extremely hard in Parliament to bring this issue forward and to ensure that there is reparations for the Caribbean. Clive, are you still online?
Thank you so much, Belle, for that warm welcome, and thank you for your wise words. It's always a pleasure to work with you. You're very collegiate. You're very generous, and it's a pleasure to have worked with you over the last couple of years and to have been your vice chair. I want to say add my thanks to all of those organisations and individuals that have been working on reparatory justice, not just this year, but for decades before that. And I think it's very important that we pay tribute to them. We stand on their shoulders. And I think even though the last few days have been pretty momentous in terms of the coverage we've got, we all know that there is still a long, long way to go before we see reparatory justice really begin to hit that target, begin to do what it says on the tin. I will just quickly say that I think our Prime Minister could have been slightly better briefed before he went to the Commonwealth Heads of State Summit. I think it was quite surprising that he thought he could take what was, frankly, in my opinion, a colonial mindset to the Commonwealth Heads of Summit, where they were going to dictate what could and could not be discussed. You might be able to do that to CLPs, to black members in the Labour Party. You can't go to a Heads of State conference and tell them what's going to be on the agenda. And I think that they made that very clear in the communique. And I want to read that communique out, or a key part of that communique, which is that, and I think this is the key line, we agree that the time has come for a meaningful, truthful, and respectful conversation towards forging a common future based on equity. Those are some big words, and those are words that the United Kingdom, the British government, have now signed up to. And it's for all of us to make sure that those words are more than just words, that they're actually adhered to. And I know that me and Belle and Diane and many others in Parliament will be pushing this government, our government, to do far more than they currently have. They've been dragged kicking and screaming to this point, and frankly, we expected that from the last hard-right Conservative government. I don't think we expected that from a government where we have a foreign secretary who is a son of the Caribbean, from Guyana. I think that David is someone who has spoke very well in the past on this issue. I hope he can do so again, and we will be encouraging him to do so in the coming weeks, months, and years. I also wanted to just quickly add on to something. Some of you may know that I made a podcast with the Trevelyan family, Laura Trevelyan, called The Heirs of Enslavement, available on all good podcast platforms. If you haven't watched it or listened to it, then please do so. But one of the issues that came up frequently, and it's one that I have taken and thought of quite a lot about, is the issue of my constituents, many of whom in Norwich have had very little benefit from 400 years of slavery, imperialism and colonialism. Many of them live in terrible conditions. They'll be living in cold houses this winter. Some of them, many of them use food banks, many of them go hungry. And the question I always have to ask myself is, if reparatory justice does include a financial contribution to these countries, do they have to pay for it? And it was Ali Gill, the chair of the Reparations Committee in Grenada, who gave a fantastic answer. And he said to me, Clive, your constituents should not be paying a penny towards any reparatory justice compensation. Because he said the same corporations, financial institutions, banking sector, insurance companies that have been exploiting the Caribbean for centuries and who continue to do so to this day are the same corporations, banks and financial institutions that are taking from your own constituents. You look at our water, you look at private equity in adult social care, you look at the private sector in the NHS, the data scraping, you look at nearly every aspect within our economy where corporations are extracting wealth from communities here in the UK and giving so little in return. He said, our problem is your problem, your constituents' problem. We have the same interests. And I realized then at that moment that the demands for reparation, for reparatory justice, is a class issue. It's a class issue. It's one that will actually take this country forward once we begin this conversation. And this conversation is going to start. We have a year before the UK Caribbean Forum. And in that year, we have to make sure that this government understands that our voice will not be suppressed, that reparatory justice will happen. In the King's speech, we heard our own government talk about bringing in an Equalities Act. That Equalities Act will, I would assume, be seeking to address the issue of racial discrimination. How can any government that has placed an Equalities Act at the heart of its legislative agenda not want to seek to go to the genesis of structural racism in this country. It's completely inconceivable. So therefore, I believe that if this government is serious about tackling racism, is serious about the communique that it has just signed up to, is serious about being a government and party for social and economic justice, then the issue of reparations will, I repeat, will be discussed in good faith, and we will make progress on it. That's the task before us, acknowledgement to action, and I hope you have all a very good conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clive. Thank you so much. So next we are going to go on to Anne Morgan, who's the co-clerk of the Reparations Working Group for the Quakers in Britain. We must remember that we are only able to hold this conference because the Quakers in Britain so helpfully give us this amazing venue, and isn't it a wonderful venue to be able to use in central London, and quite a beautiful space. So we are so grateful to the Quakers in Britain for that, and actually for the work that they are doing on reparative justice, which you will hear about throughout the day. So Anne, we're going to go over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, can I welcome you all most warmly to Friends House, the Centre for Quakers in Britain, for this really important conference. It's important because it meshes with our Quaker discernment, because in 2021, we agreed to become an anti-racist church. And in 2022, we said we would examine how we might make reparations for our part in the transatlantic chattel slave trade, colonialism, and economic exploitation. I'm Anne Morgan. I'm one of the co-clerks of Quakers in Britain Reparations Working Group. You'll meet Margarita Remijuda, my co-clerk, in the plenary session this afternoon. In the summer of 2023, Quakers in Britain trustees set up the Reparations Working Group. We're set up for 3 to 5 years. The group's got 8 members, including friends of African descent. And this first year, we've been supported by our Deputy Recording Clerk and our Equity and Justice Lead. We've just appointed a dedicated full-time reparations coordinator on a 3-year contract. So this is another commitment that we're making to our work on reparations. In addition, we've co-opted members of staff from our Quaker College in Woodbrook so that we can actually provide courses for friends across Britain so that they may understand our work. And we've also got in our team now the International Peace and Justice Officer. So what are we doing about reparations? How are we approaching our work? Well, the first thing we had to do is really educate ourselves, quite frankly. Most of us who joined the group were in different places to each other in terms of our knowledge of reparation. I, for example, have developed, over the research that I've been doing, a knowledge of the involvement of Quakers in Lancaster in the enslavement of people and the ownership of plantations. But others had not had that opportunity. And so we had to actually understand initially that reparations and any work we did needed to have centrally at the heart of it those people who are experiencing the legacies of enslavement, colonialism, and economic exploitation. And we had to recognise that our work was about repairing relationships with them above all else. We then agreed our next step was to actually look at our history, to tell the truth about Quaker involvement in transatlantic chattel slavery. And we're doing this by establishing 2 work streams. The first is actually undertaking historical research across Britain Yearly Meeting, and that is to acknowledge the level of involvement of individual Quakers and Quaker families. We're different to some of the other churches that are looking at reparations. We never as a church owned plantations ourselves. But let me just give you an example from the work that we're uncovering so far. In Lancaster, 18 Quaker merchants and 2 of their womenfolk, which really startled me, were involved both in trading enslaved Africans and, in the case of one family, of owning 10 plantations in the Caribbean, 2 members of which were compensated in 1834. We know how many enslaved people were traded. We know how many died in the Middle Passage. And this was painful information to find about Quakers actually being involved in this appalling trade. And this was despite our church saying in 1727 that trading in people from Africa was wrong, and they condemned the trade. And then again in 1761, they said any Quaker involved should be disowned by the religious community. But my meeting did not do that. And then we've discovered that in the archive of Hartford and Hitchin Quakers, we found the founding documents for West Jersey in the United States. And this identifies the Quakers who wrote these documents. And we know that that removed Indigenous people from their lands. So we're there looking further into how the First Nations people were affected by this. So we've got groups now around Britain who are researching their 18th century meetings. And they're looking also, as Bella has talked about, people who set up banks, because Quakers did set up banks using the profit from this appalling trade. They ensured shipping, and they established cotton, spinning and weaving factories, and artisan businesses such as furniture making, from mahogany, for example, all of which supported this dreadful slave economy. And this approach that we're actually taking is enabling Quaker meetings around the country to own and identify this discomforting history. Quakers in the slaving ports of Lancaster and Bristol, we're well ahead of others who are examining their history, and we're trying to embed it in our local communities. We're actually working with local Black history groups. For example, in Lancaster, we support the history group Slave Trail Walks, and we've developed a leaflet about Quaker involvement to support those walks. And the trail starts at the meeting house, and all the Key Stage 2 children in the city undertake the trail as part of the module that Black History Group has developed. The Reparations Working Group is working with Quakers in Britain archivists, to develop a central searchable database to store this research, and it will support any peer reviewing we do of the work we've researched. The second of the 2 work streams I'm talking about is going to look at the results of this research and identify the financial harms and the impact that Quaker involvement has caused. We further recognise the need to listen to friends, not just in Britain, but also around the world, in particular those experiencing, as I've said, the legacy of colonialism, enslavement, and economic exploitation. And so we've got a networking and listening work stream. 2 of our group attended the Quaker World Plenary this August in South Africa to explain what we're doing, but more importantly, to listen. I have to say that in doing this, we are identifying legacies left by British colonialism, British government colonialism, in particular in the continent of Africa. And that is something we may, as a small church, not be in a position to address. But we've made contact with other faith groups, which is really important to us. One in particular I will mention. That's the Church's Reparation Action Forum of Jamaica, or CRAFT Jamaica. CRAFT came to London in 2023 to meet with us and to explain their 7-point plan to transform Jamaican society. And the first point asks for what we've just heard Belle talk about, an apology, which, as we know, costs nothing. Point 4 in their plan speaks of re-imaging education. And the churches there are going to make available church land to build up to 14 free schools that will teach self-awareness, self-esteem, as well as a history that isn't that of the British Empire. Each school will need funding. we were agreed that our next step, I beg your pardon. In Britain, we have communicated with Quakers regularly through our weekly newsletter called Quake. We've made a video explaining why we as individuals are involved and we're providing briefing sessions at our annual gathering here at Friends House. Meetings who set up racial justice learning groups. We're very good at educating ourselves, reading and learning. They are now learning about reparations as well, and those of us on the group are kept busy visiting them. Our fourth work stream, you won't be surprised to hear as a faith group, is looking at the theology used by Quakers and other churches and other people to justify enslavement or to support abolition. And that work stream we hope will start work in 2025. So that's just a very brief outline of how we're approaching our work. Our brief is to use this information to work towards developing an apology and a pathway to reparations that we can recommend to Quakers in Britain trustees. We hope you have an informative and fruitful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and again to the Quakers in Britain for helping us to put on this conference. Our next welcome will come from another one of our sponsors that has provided so much for this day, the Open Society Foundations, and we're going to hear from Jasmine Mickens, who is an advocacy officer, has been working fiercely right around the world on reparatory justice. Jasmine.
Good morning, esteemed members of Parliament. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Delegates and distinguished guests, thank you also to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Afrikan Reparations for convening us today. I am Jasmine Mickens, Advocacy Officer at the Open Society Foundations, specializing in racial and reparative justice, and it's truly a pleasure to welcome you to the UK Reparations Conference of 2024 to discuss one of the most important issues of our time. A conversation whose time has come, as Prince, now King, Charles stated in Kigali in 2022 at the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So our timing today is truly significant as we witness the global reparations movement gaining unprecedented momentum, not just in one region, but across the African diaspora. As the speakers before me had pointed out, just days ago, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting concluded, and we saw unwavering resolve from our brothers and sisters in CARICOM in particular. And I think we remain guided by their courageous push for reparations that compels us to fortify our advocacy for justice and reparations. As we forge ahead, our work is not just necessary. Our work is imperative for the global cohesion of the reparations movement, bringing together civil society, governments, and ecosystems of experts and activists. And that's really the role that Open Society has been playing, and to ensure that we are playing a role of supporting the growth of the global reparations movement, while also respecting the autonomy of Africans and people of African descent and their vision for what reparations should be. My role as the global movement strategist has been to support that ecosystem using 4 interconnected pillars. Those pillars being 1, community building, 2, the incubation of ideas that offer concrete policy solutions, 3, advancing jurisprudence on reparations, and then 4, really strengthening this transnational cohesion of community and policy stakeholders. So today, it's a pleasure to speak to you all in the UK, because I think the UK plays a unique role in the global ecosystem, really around the public education about the history that is not well known, and history that some would prefer to forget, erase, or otherwise suppress. And that history is what Belle alluded to in her remarks, and others have too, around the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act. which was landmark legislation that prioritized the economic stability of enslavers over reparations to the enslaved. And that was 20 million pounds plus years of free labor after the act was passed. I want to highlight this because I think understanding the economic debate around it in history, but also how that loan was structured, tells us critical information. And I think many people, both within and outside of the reparations space, are unaware that this legislation established a model of how you can pay reparations over time without destabilizing or bankrupting one's economy. So, I mean, more importantly, it reminds us that where there is a will, there is a way. So as we look ahead to 2025, which has been designated as the African Union's Year of Reparations, we stand at a very pivotal moment where our work is not only to keep this conversation alive, but to ensure that it leads to concrete commitments, policies, and strategies that are rooted in the unification and the self-determination of people of African descent. And again, I'm going to emphasize self-determination because that really centers people of African descent as the architects of what reparations is, not former colonial powers, not some of the corporations who were complicit in the slave trade. And so this road to meaningful repair demands our collective strength and our unwavering vision, reminding us that this journey is not bound by borders, but it is a shared mission for us all here and across the diaspora to carry it forward together. So I just want to say thanks again for everyone who came in person, everyone who joined online, and for all of us who will continue to push this forward, building on the great work of our ancestors and activists who have been at this for decades. So thank you again, and I look forward to an amazing conference.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and of course, again, for all of the Open Society Foundation's support. I'm now going to go over to somebody who's been extremely helpful to the conference, organisation rather, that has been extremely pivotal to the reparations space, particularly in acting in reparations cases, and that's Leigh Day. And we're going to hear from Walker Seyachilinga from Leigh Day. Thank you, Walker.
Good morning, conference, both online and here. As Belle says, my name is Walker Seyachilinga, and I'm a lawyer at Leigh Day. I'm going to talk about 3 points, really, about why Leigh Day is involved in this, both his history, the present, and then what we have for the future. So Leigh Day was established in around 1987, and over the last 37 years or so, we have been involved in a number of cases that relate to injustices which happened in the past. And we've been working on how do you find legal pathways to securing justice for people today. So one of the first cases we worked on was in 2000, and that involved prisoners of war who had been interned in Japan during the Second World War. There were about 20,000 or so of them. We managed to secure some compensation for them. We ran this case through the 1990s and to its conclusion in 2000. Following that success, we were approached by some elders in Kenya from the Mau Mau, and we acted for them, and I'll speak a little bit about that in a moment, which led in 2013 to us securing some compensation for them and an acknowledgement rather than an apology from the British government. It was William Hague at the time who was Foreign Secretary. Following that victory in the British courts, we then were approached by the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, Ralph Gonsalves, and he asked us to assist CARICOM in putting together an advice in relation to reparations for the transatlantic slave trade. We instructed a barrister at the time who we had worked with on the Mau Mau litigation. His name happened to be Richard Hermer, and if you've been watching the news, you know that he now is the Attorney General. So he assisted us in relation to the Mau Mau litigation, but also in assisting CARICOM with some advice in relation to CERD. Now, we are aware that following those developments, we received some criticism, and we're quite, we put our hands up in relation to the Mama litigation. And so we did some soul searching. And after a while, the firm put together a new team to look at the issue of reparations. And that new team is led by Jacqueline McKenzie, who some of you will know. She is, a daughter of... She is a daughter of the Caribbean through and through, but also I think her track record speaks for itself, both in relation to handling cases that where the injustices stem from the past, but also for taking on the establishment, for taking on the government, in holding them to account for past injustices. So Jackie put together a team, of which I am one of those assisting her. We have two others. One of my colleagues, his name is Jerome Bond, he will be leading one of the sessions today on racial justice and the role of reparations in building a just society. Jackie herself will be on one of the panels that will be led by Sister Esther even, on the law and reparative justice. So both of them will be here later today. So that's what we did as a way of sort of turning around our work looking at historic injustices. And since the appointment of Jackie, our team has done a number of things. In May 2023, we met under the auspices of Bell and the APPG on reparative justice. So we had an event at the House of Commons looking at whether there is a pathway, legal pathway to reparations. In November 2013, we invited Barbados CARICOM Commissioner on Reparative Justice, David Commission, to attend a public lecture, or to give a public lecture at Leigh, again relating to legal pathways to reparative justice. In the same year, we were invited to address a joint AU and CARICOM meeting, which took place in Barbados. We attended remotely, where again we spoke of some of our work. And we've continued to work in this space. More recently, last week, we had a legal roundtable where we brought together community activists, lawyers, and others who are active in this space to again look at what we can do in respect of reparations. But that's not it. Jackie will be spending the next 3 months or so across the CARICOM region, meeting with various leaders of reparations commissions, as well as heads of state, again, trying to chat a way through this. We'll continue to work in the reparations space as a law firm, looking not only at what's happened in the past, but also new mechanisms that are coming up. So for instance, in the space of climate justice, there's a lot that's happening there to look at how have things that took place in the past, how can firstly they be quantified, but also how can you bring a claim in relation to those. We are also learning from jurisdictions such as Canada and New Zealand, where they've been very successful in fighting for the rights of indigenous communities, even in relation to things which took place more than 200 years ago. So we're learning from those, both again from the perspective of how you quantify claims like that, but also how you basically speak of the experiences, lived experiences of people who are bringing these claims. So thank you so much. Just going back to what was said in the libation, I think we come here with a heart of humility, both to learn, but also to get across what we have learned and to see how we can contribute to this. So thank you very much for the conference organizers.
Thank you very much, Walker, and thank you very much to Leigh for all they do and continuing to sponsor our conference again this year. We're so very grateful. Finally, in terms of a welcome, we are going to hear from one more person, and that is Abdirahim Hassan, who is the founder of Coffee Afrik. Abdi, are you
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Bill and Joel and the team, for inviting me to the UK Reparations Conference 2024, and assalamu alaikum to all delegates at the conference today. My name is Abdirahim Hassan, the founder of Coffee Afrik, CIC, and we're very humbled to be have a very small impact on the conference today as one of the many amazing sponsors that are supporting the work. As a Muslim and originally someone who was born in Somaliland, The idea that somehow reparations or the conversation of reparations is the past is a fallacy. We are witnessing what's happening in Palestine at the moment, in Congo, in Sudan, and all of this, we know, is linked to power and the conversation of reparations. As Bell said earlier, without repeating it, the issue of saying that a deep apology or sorrow is enough is unacceptable. The conversation that we somehow should accept an apology or an issue of sorrow is just not enough. I think the reason why this is troublesome for some leaders at the moment, the global north leaders, is that so many fear the liberation of black communities and of communities coming together of power. As somebody who studied economics, I speak a lot about debt relief and the institutions and the power that the World Bank, the IMF, the Asian Development Bank, and many other global institutions have placed on all of our motherlands. And what we don't need is, as was said this week in the question time session, said by the Environment Secretary, is, well, we don't need skills sharing. We are people of the land. We are people that have created so much of the systems that exist, whether it's through mathematics or science. We don't need more poorly built hospitals. What we need is justice. And I think what we have to be clear about and clearer about is what we want from a reparations perspective. What do the reparation principles look like for us? How do we create those self-determination and self-determined principles? And I think fundamentally, a key message that I witness working at Coffee Afrik almost every day is that we witness continuously that so much of these harmful systems are rooted in what's happening to our communities in housing, happening to our communities through capitalism, for health injustice and the criminal justice system. So a direct message to Keir Starmer is that this is not a conversation of the past. This is what's happening to us in the present, and specifically to black communities. What I also think we need to be much more firmer about is how we co-produce globally these principles of reparations. And whether it's, as I said earlier, debt relief or dismantling some of these same systems that cause us harm, a small micro example of something we were able to do during the pandemic as an organization is we were directly bombarding the CEO of Lloyds Bank to reimagine how they have created their foundation. And as a result of our pressure and other organizations, they ended up creating specific funding for Black-led organizations, which still exists today. At the root of who I am is deep activism, having done this work for over 20 years. And I think a lot about Assata Shakur and her autobiography, that it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. And we must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Because today, in the work that I do, through the hubs, the 7 hubs we work at, I understand that these issues of slavery and colonization and abuse of power are directly at, for example, one of the hubs we support and created, our youth hub, and the impact on young black men and the lack of confidence that exists because of these systems. So I say again to Keir Starmer that this is a conversation that has to happen, and this is the right time for us to keep applying the pressure, and that if you're going to support other genocides and other issues that exist in the world, this conversation is not a conversation that will be going away quietly. And I'm so proud of the leaders that exist in the world that are black who are fighting at the moment for this cause. But also, to conclude, want to highlight that this is a long, long fight. And I think of Dr. Akomolafe, who says, our times are so urgent, let us slow down. I think of Stormzy last year, speaking at a Chris Garber protest, who said, we need stamina, that this takes time, and we need a long-term ability to carry on fighting for this cause. But we also need to create, as John Lewis said, good trouble and necessary trouble in this moment. I really want to end with thanking you, Bill. I know that you are taking on so much, and as an incredible black woman and as a black man, I want to affirm you and thank you for everything that you do, and to everybody else that's doing this work. My love and solidarity, as Clive said, to all of our elders. And my prayer is, as a collective, that we continue to use hope as a discipline. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abdi, and for your support. It has been amazing. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over for the first plenary, but before I do, I want to turn you all to your conference packs in which you have one of these letters. One of the things that we want to leave this conference with, other than your very, very firm views on how we should be moving forward in policy, is that idea that we do need to start taking action on Parliament. So here we're asking all of you to write to your MPs. I can deliver these for you. But I do need to know your name, address, postcode and email. You don't have to show this to me. It can be folded up. I will not take your data because I'm not allowed to, but I will make sure that this arrives with the right Member of Parliament. If you already know you're a Member of Parliament, you can just fold it over and give it to somebody at the front desk who will put it straight into an envelope for you. If not, we can help you find that Member of Parliament and make sure that they get this very important letter explaining that, you know, that you are an individual who thinks that the time has come for reparations. So please do make sure you take that action, and we'll make sure it's available for people online also.